Welcome to Emphasis Added, a podcast brought to you by the Houston Law Review about legal issues, prominent lawyers, and the study and practice of law. I'm Harrison Little.
And I'm Jake Guarino, and we are your hosts for Season 5. Thank you for joining us.
So we're going to go ahead and get started with our live podcast panel, Power in Numbers. And the great sort of ending to our summit. We have been talking a lot about, over the last day and a half, about networking, about leveraging on this HNBA family and on your networks, on your people, on your connections, whether those mentors are family or whether they are people that you work with or friends across the aisle, the importance of networking, the importance of leveraging on those networks. And oftentimes that leveraging, right, is focused on an individual, whether you reach out to a friend, whether you reach out to a mentor, an individual mentor, we do that all the time. And I think we're encouraging folks to do that more and more and expanding the group of people that you reach out to. But power in numbers, right, is about the collective. It is about the collective power that comes from our group. We talked about the population, the Hispanic population in the United States, but how we still are a very small number in terms of Latinx lawyers. With respect to women, it's even a smaller number. We've talked about that. Nevertheless, right, the collective power is so important. And that is what we're going to be focusing on today. And so, Adri, thank you so much for this wonderful idea and for bringing together this incredible panel, known some for some time, and just honored to be in y'all's presence. So thank you very much.
Thank you for that introduction, Juan. And I just want to say thank you to all of you for being here. This wouldn't be possible without you. And thank you especially to our esteemed panelists for giving up your time. I know you're each very busy and successful women, and I can't wait to talk about what all you're doing in your careers right now. So thank you for being here. As Juan mentioned, my name is Adri Langemeier. I am an associate at Gibson Dunn here in Houston, in this building actually. And I graduated from the University of Houston Law Center in 2021 and was formerly a podcast editor for the Houston Law Review podcast. And so thank you to my co-host here, Jake, who is currently at the University of Houston Law Center and leading on the podcast. I'll let Jake introduce himself before we introduce our panelists.
Hi, thank you for having me today. I'm very excited to meet and talk with all of you here today. As Adri said, my name is Jake Guarino. I'm a Rising 3L at the University of Houston Law Center, and I am the podcast editor for Board 61 of the Houston Law Review.
Well, as you can see in front of us, we have a wonderful panel of guest speakers here today, and I'm going to introduce just a little bit about each of them, but I'll give you a moment also just to share about who you are and what you're doing currently in your career. So I will start at the end of the table here. We have Justice Amparo Guerra. She is on the Texas First Court of Appeals, and she was elected to the Texas First Court of Appeals in November 2020 after practicing law for nearly 20 years, handling complex civil cases in state and federal trial and appellate courts. Justice Guerra, hi, welcome to the panel. Thank you for being here. No, I know this is a very long table. We're so excited to hear from you and hear about your journey.
Next, Commissioner Briones, welcome. Thank you for joining us today. Commissioner Briones is a native Texan and proud Latino who grew up on the U.S.-Mexico border. She's a daughter of teachers who taught her the importance of education, hard work, and serving others. And she practices these values every day at the County Commissioner Office for Precinct 4. Commissioner Briones.
Thank you. And next to Commissioner Briones, we have Alicia Castro, who is a partner at Locke Lord. She concentrates her practice in business and fiduciary litigation, securities litigation, trust and estates litigation, internal and government investigations and arbitration. She has represented companies and individuals in a wide range of complex litigation and private arbitration disputes in energy, private equity, and financial service industries. And I'm excited to talk to you a little bit more about a local Houston organization that you helped found, but we're going to get into that shortly.
Next, we have,
Thank you for being here.
apologies, sorry. Next, we have Maria Amelia Calaf, also known as Mac. She's a partner at Botkin Chiarello Calaf. She is a seasoned first-chair litigator who practices complex commercial litigation and focuses on non-competes, non-solicitation, and trade secret litigation. She regularly represents clients in disputes concerning business torts, breach of contract, defamation, and constitutional challenges. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. Thrilled to be here.
Okay, so we're gonna dive right in, and we've kind of divided this discussion into a couple of themes. And so our first theme we are actually just discussing in our last panel, and it's impact. So even though our numbers in the legal community are quite small, 5% of all lawyers are Latino, 2% of Latinas are lawyers, I really do truly believe that our impact is quite strong and has so many ripples throughout the community, as we can see from each one of you in your careers and the many lives that you've touched. So to kick us off, I would love to hear about who or what has had the greatest impact on your career. And we'll start with Justice Guerra.
Let me turn this on. Is that better? So actually, when I was growing up, my mom was an immigration lawyer. She was kind of a world famous immigration lawyer. But I really didn't know kind of on a day-to-day basis what she was doing. So I can't really say that she was my sort of biggest role model as far as my career in the end. I did think I was going to do international human rights work. That's the kind of work I was drawn to, probably because of my mom. But then when I went to law school, I never thought I'd do litigation at all. It always looked very daunting to me and something that I didn't think I could handle that. And then I interned with a federal district judge down in Brownsville, Judge Filemon Vela, and in interacting with him and seeing different proceedings in the courts down there, it kind of gave me this really sort of new vantage point on what happens in the courtroom. And I saw some really great lawyers who were really well prepared and, advocated very well for their clients. And then I saw some others that weren't quite so prepared. And I thought, well, gosh, if they can do it, maybe I can too. And Judge Vela himself was just an amazing, amazing person and judge. And he really showed me that being a judge is more than just what you do in the courthouse. It's also what you do in your community. And because I sort of was drawn to the public interest side of things, I saw that as an avenue to sort of aim for, to sort of fulfill that desire in me. So he was probably the biggest influence on me as far as where I ended up in the end.
Thank you for sharing that, Commissioner Briones.
Sure. I would say two things. First of all, thank you to HNBA for bringing us together. It's wonderful to feel the solidarity when we're together as HNBA. And it's wonderful to make new friends every single time. So I look forward to learning from y'all. Two things had the biggest impact. I would say number one, my parents, as y'all heard, they're both educators. And public service was everything. I mean, they've spent their entire lives trying to educate and empower the youth of Laredo, where I'm from, on the US-Mexico border. And that was, it is their life, right? To just try to make the community better through education. And after church on Sundays, it was, helping at the soup kitchen. That was what we did. And they embedded that commitment to service. Second, it was growing up on the US-Mexico border. I'm an extremely proud Latina of Mexican heritage. I love Mexico to my core. And growing up literally at the juxtaposition of Laredo and Nuevo Laredo and seeing the difference of the rule of law, literally when we'd walk across back then, we would just walk back and forth, and half of my high school were kids from Nuevo Laredo. And so it really was a fluid border at the time, but seeing the difference in the rule of law, it just embedded in me a deep commitment that everybody should be equal under the law. The amount of money you have, what family you come from, your race, etc., should never dictate the way you're treated. And so that fundamental commitment to equality under the law and growing up on the border and seeing that really had a great impact as to how I kind of guide my decisions.
I would say for myself, it was every step along the way, I had somebody to look up to who I really connected with and who I saw myself in. And that a lot of things at each step, it didn't occur to me that I could go on to another step until I looked around and I had great role models and great examples. So for me, it started with in college was the first time I even thought about going to law school or the idea of being a lawyer. And it all came from, a Latino professor who took an interest and, opened my eyes to, oh, this is something that you could do. And then same thing in law school and at my first law firm, there were wonderful, wonderful mentors and where I work, currently. I mean, I have just been blessed with mentors along the way who very much encouraged me and pushed me when I needed to be pushed and supported me. And every one of them has been influential.
So like everyone else, I had the benefit of having wonderful mentors. My mentors, though, none of them looked like me. None of them were women. All of the people who have lifted me up have been white men. And so I say that because I think it's important to be open to that possibility that there are going to be people who don't look like you and you don't share a common lived experience, but that do see something in you. They see your potential. They see your hard work. They see the value proposition that you bring and they want to lift you up, and you have to be open to that opportunity. I also want to spend a moment talking about the difference between mentors and sponsors. I had great mentors. For the most part, they were, as I said, white men. I had fantastic sponsors. And what is the difference between that? And that is really critical for particularly those of you who are in corporations or are in law firms. The sponsor is the person who has the power. The sponsor is the person who can say, hey, Mac, I think you're ready. You should take an expert deposition. And they put you on a case that has a bunch of expert depositions and you go and you build that skill set. Check. You now have that. That person has the power to make that decision. Your mentor is the person who you're like, oh my God, I'm going to puke because this expert is so, has all this credentials and I am so nervous and I'm really like out of my comfort zone. And sometimes those two coalesce, right? Sometimes your sponsor is your mentor and that can happen. But having a sponsor was really important for me to really kind of open strategic opportunities to really make sure that I was progressing in my career and that I didn't stall professionally. And I think, identifying those two and keeping an eye for those two is important. And I was just we were just talking that I went to my 20-year law school reunion and I sat next to one of my class. We both went to University of Chicago. My class only had 4 Latinos. 3 of us were women and 1 guy. I was sitting next to one of my classmates and she said, I never had a sponsor. The difference between you and me was I never had a sponsor. I had a lot of mentors, but I never had a sponsor. So I didn't have that those doors were not opening. And it sort of reminded me about how fortunate, quite candidly, I was that there were people who were at the corner offices who were making sure that I had those opportunities. So for those of you that are coming up, make sure that those people know your names. Make sure you're doing excellent work and make sure that you are making the connections no matter how awkward they feel so you can have those sponsors. That's different from having a mentor. A mentor is your friend who's going to, help you out, cheer you up when you need cheering up, practice with you, hold you when you really think, oh my God, I'm going to throw up. I'm going to be so nervous. But make sure that there's people who have a vote and a voice at the table that are also championing you as you go through your professional trajectory.
That's actually a wonderful response. Thank you for sharing that. And a great segue into kind of my next question in this area of impact. And the question is, what factors do you believe most impact Latinx representation in the legal field? But I want to dig down on that a little bit because we've talked a lot today about different facets, barriers to entry. And we've talked obviously about the pipeline to getting here. And so I want to dig a little bit more into staying and succeeding. And I think, Mac, you touched on that so poignantly in describing the difference between a mentor and a sponsor, which I had never heard before. So what is it that each of you in your respective careers, what have you seen that helps Latina lawyers stay and succeed in this field? I'll let anybody popcorn answer that one.
So I love the term sponsor. I would always call them my champions. And so kind of reverting back to my, practice years, I had, sponsors who similar, saw, I think, something in ones who gave me my wings and had positions where they promote me. And so I used to say always I was just kind of riding this wave. Very lucky to have these people who had my back and who were strong. But now looking back on it, I think that feel that way, that it was just luck and just riding a wave, because it all comes from showing up every day, doing your best. I know that nowadays, it was 20 years ago, conscious of these things, but always saying yes. Now I know there's kind of a push to have boundaries and say no, but I have to say personally that doors opened because I always said yes. And I think go about it other than making yourself available and always and doing the very basic things too, time, meeting deadlines, always asking, what just very basic things.
Go ahead, Mac.
Something. Okay. There's two things that I think have served me well and that I want to share with you guys, because I think they're coming to probably a lot of fellow panelists. Is one, be open to feedback. And what do I mean by that? I am been practicing long enough that when I got a brief back, it was all full of red markings, with a pen. If you get a red line, don't internalize that like, oh, I am so terrible. Of course, my brief is better than your brief. I've been writing briefs for 20 years. It should be better. It would be tragic if mine weren't better than yours. Take that as a learning opportunity. Don't think about, be open to the idea that you're learning and that you learn by making mistakes. And so take feedback from your written product, take feedback, when you do a deposition, when you go to a meeting, always ask people, to give you feedback. I think when people who you're working with see that you're open to that and that you're seeking those learning opportunities, it will come back to you, they'll come to you with more opportunities for growth, right? So see it as growth opportunities, not as a mark. And I think that was really helpful. Also, be willing to reinvent yourself. And there will be certain points in your career where that becomes necessary. And I'm not sure if some of you have shared those experiences, but when I came out of law school, I thought I'm going to be, a securities litigator and I'm going to work in big law my whole life. But then life happened and I had to move to Austin and I had 2 little kids and I could not, I wanted to be a litigator and I really wanted to have like on my feet experience. So I never thought I was going to work for government, much less for state of Texas for the attorney general, but I did. And I ended up loving it. Be open to reinventing yourself, to having experience that meet your goals. My goal at that time was I really need to be in court a lot because I want to be able to go back to private practice and say to clients, I've done dozens of hearings, dozens of appeals. And that was the one sure way for me to do it. And so as you think of your whole plan, your whole career there's a whole arc to it. It's not one moment. And so if you're doing something and it doesn't feel great, or you have an opportunity to try something else, be open to those opportunities. Careers are not linear.
I'll just add on that. I think those are both wonderful, wonderful. I mean, I would tack on everything because I agree wholeheartedly that always saying yes, and it goes to getting more experience. To me, I think having a positive attitude, if you look at everything with a positive way as best you can, will carry you through because it's a difficult. I mean, sometimes it will be difficult. There will be the days where the red line of the brief is all red. Or I once got one where someone circled something and wrote in question mark, like the name of where I went to college, as a joke,
Oh.
you take things, so you have to know who you're working with. But I like that one because, I didn't make that mistake again. And so it was somebody who, we're good, dear friends now. And so I think you take everything with a positive attitude, and that at the beginning, there is a career trajectory that just has to start with saying yes and working the late hours or putting in the hard work and knowing that it's all a growing experience. And if you view it in a positive way, then it is much more likely to be, palatable as you have to shift through each phase of your career.
I just want to reflect quickly because you guys are sharing so much great wisdom, and I feel like I'm like just washing right over my head. But one of the things that I'm hearing from each of you is this idea of framing, and framing in two ways, really. Framing how you look at something and your mentality and how you're approaching it, but also framing in the sense of, I'm hearing this theme of like doors and windows, and opening doors and saying yes so that doors will be open, but also creating kind of opportunities for yourself and maybe making a window where doors otherwise closed. So I really love kind of hearing that each of you have experienced that in your careers in different ways. And I want to specifically ask Amparo and Leslie about your careers, because you are in public service right now. And I think that's something, we need more Latinos in the law, period, but specifically in positions of power, as public servants, as partners at law firms as well. Curious about your government service in relation to this question.
Sure. So I couldn't agree more. Just lean in to unexpected opportunities. I feel many lawyers are type A and we all have a plan as to how things are going to go. It's not going to go that way, right? Spoiler alert, it's not going to go that way. But some of the best things in my life have been these complete unexpected blessings, which relate to my government service. So I was a public school teacher, 8th and 10th grade, went to law school, moved back to Texas. I worked at Vincent and Elkins down the street, and I was never going to work in big law because I was going to do civil rights work and human rights work. And I met my husband there, learned a lot. Again, it all relates to a skiing accident. Fast forward, then I worked at one of the largest private foundations in the country for 8 years, general counsel, COO, chief talent officer. Again, complete unexpected blessing. It was one of those things, get a call out of the blue, not what I was planning, one of the best experiences. Then fast forward, and this will lead to the government experience. There was a vacancy on the bench at one of the civil court at law benches here. And I got a call actually from Justice Guerra, who now is like a sister to me. But at the time I'd met her a couple times. I'd never talked to her on the phone. I just talked to her at events like this. And they were interviewing people to be appointed to this bench. And she thought of me. So again, the importance of creating authentic relationships, especially in our Latino community, so that you can champion each other. And whether it's a board, whether it's some kind of commission, whether it's an appointment opportunity. So she called me and they were interviewing a bunch of candidates. I'm not sure how they picked me over these partners in law firms who had been litigating case after case. To be honest, I'd never litigated. I always wanted to be a trial attorney, but my career took a different path. I had never even taken a deposition, but for some reason, this committee decided to put me as the judge. And this will go to another question we have later on. But again, you just go for it, right? Went in, was a judge for 3 years. But as you know, in Texas, you have to run if you want to be a judge. And I was never going to run for office. I was never going to work in big law. I was never going to date someone I work with. I worked in big law, met my husband at work, and I was finding myself running for office. So I was judge by day, candidate by night. I had always voted, but I had never, Harris County is one of the biggest counties in the country. And you have to go kiss the ring and go to, I'm a Democrat, all these Democratic clubs and screenings and endorsements and all these things. And you just have to lean in, right? And it was this baptism by fire, was elected, but only for the unexpired term. So basically I got to keep, so it was 2020, I got to keep running. I was going to be on the ballot in 2022. And then, you know, judges, I'm sure you've signed some of those judicial petitions. I was going to run for the bench again and was considering the federal bench. And thank you for HNBA for all of your support. And I got this call again out of the blue saying, hey, we really think you'd be amazing as commissioner. And part of me was like, commissioner, what? Had to lean in and started talking with individuals, started learning more about what the role was. And at the end of the day, I'm much more, as much as I loved being a judge, I'm more of an advocate. And so this door opened where we get to work with a $5 billion budget and do everything from flood mitigation to criminal justice reform to parks to public health. And my precinct alone is bigger than 9 states and is the size of Rhode Island land-wise. So now I feel like I've been so blessed in my career. If I had stuck with, I'm only going to do X and I will never ever do Y, I wouldn't have allowed myself to throw myself into these random calls and opportunities that came into being. And if any of you ever want to run for office, I will champion you all day, every day. It is a brutal sport. You have to have very thick skin, but luckily I have very thick skin and don't really care what people say. And it's about the people. And it connects me to that little girl who grew up on the border, who believes deeply in how the law should impact everyone and how everyone should be treated fairly. And now I'm in a position of power where who I hire, who I appoint to boards, how I spend the money, where I put the next park has an implication that will affect millions. And so I feel tremendously blessed because it was never part of the plan. And I don't like politics. And that's how I have found myself in something. So never say never and pick up the phone when you get some random, idea or question and just go for it. Because you never want to look down years later and say, what if I had tried? The worst thing is you might lose or you might fail or you might not want to work there. But guess what? You get right back up and you can do it again. But you don't know what's in store for you unless you try.
Yes, and that was probably one of the best phone calls I ever made. So my journey is a little bit different. One thing I didn't mention from before is when I was growing up, I actually thought I was going to be a physician. So that's kind of what the trajectory I thought I was going on. And then I had worked, so I spent my formative years in Brownsville. And so I had done some work on both sides of the border in colonias and very similar experience seeing, this abject poverty on both sides of the border and this disparity in opportunities that you see on both sides of the border, but, really relegated to Mexicans, right? And so that had a profound impact on me. After I finished law school, college and law school, I had student loans that I needed to repay. And so the public interest lawyer in me had to give way to finding a job that would pay me enough to pay back my loans. And so I had clerked for a federal district judge, and some law clerks that I had known there had come up to work in Houston and really enjoyed their jobs and said, we think you would like it here too. And so they basically opened the door for me to get into a firm here in Houston. So I was practicing there and I really did enjoy the practice, and the competitor in me enjoyed, kind of the adversarial aspects of litigation. And, was meeting great people. Everything was, going pretty well, but that part of me that wanted to do more to affect my community in a positive way was feeling stifled. And so a couple years in, I learned that they were hiring associate municipal judges at the court here in Houston. And you only had to have been practicing 2 years. And so again, I had that vision of Judge Vela and what he represented to me as a public servant and as a judge. And so I applied. And then that's how I became a judge at 28 years old. But I have to say that in doing so, I was always very conscious of the fact that I, back then looked very young and was very young. And so I always wanted people to never be able to say, see, she was too immature. She was too young. She should have never gotten this job. So I think it really made me work that much harder and be that much more respectful and prepared, because I never wanted anyone to say that. And so I think it made me rise to an occasion that I didn't even realize that, I would be. So then after doing that, I was practicing law full time and working at the municipal court at night and on weekends and holidays, and basically kind of running myself a little ragged. But I was enjoying it. I was fulfilling kind of all of my career wants and needs. And then there was a federal magistrate who told me, there's a magistrate position opening up. And, I really think that you should apply. And this was not something that I had considered, in myself qualified for, frankly. But because he told me, I think you have what it takes. I think you should apply. I will tell you, I applied a few times and I got very close one time. And was pretty devastated when I didn't get one of those positions, because I made it through this entire vetting process and basically was the runner-up in the end. And so I was initially very, very sad to have not gotten it. But having gone through that process, told me, and actually the chief judge at the time also told me, she said, we think you were really impressive. It was so close. You should definitely try again. And, at first I thought, oh, that's terrible. I don't know if I want to go through that again. But it did tell me, gosh, if these people who do this job think that I'm qualified to do this job, maybe there are other opportunities that I could be pursuing that aren't necessarily this, because those positions don't come open all the time. And so my mom was the first Latina to ever serve on a appellate court in Texas. So that was always kind of in the back of my mind. I was always looking at the composition of our judiciary. And here in the most diverse area in the country, we were still and still are, very lacking in representation on our courts. So I kind of used all of that information, all of that experience, and, talked to some people and looked at our courts of appeals. So our courts of appeals cover 10 counties. It's a huge, huge district. Harris County, obviously the biggest one. And we had no African Americans and no Latinos on these courts of appeals here that cover this very diverse area. And I said, this is not acceptable. So I said, okay, then I'm going to throw my hat in the ring and see what happens. Yeah, it is definitely not, a gentleman's sport. I would say it's, it's pretty hardcore, and it tests every bit of you. So it's definitely not something to go into lightly. But you have examples of people who are just like you, who've done it and can tell you, if you ever think of doing this, sort of how to go about it. But yeah, I was just super fortunate throughout the process that I was able to garner support from, all my friends and colleagues, many of whom do not agree with my politics, who just, believed in me. And so I just feel so blessed, and it really is a dream come true to be in this job where I finally, in one job, get to do all the things that I always wanted to do, which is put together, my legal background and also affect, very serious issues in our community. So I would say, and now, and also when I was campaigning, that the courts of appeals are the most important courts that you probably never heard of. We have general jurisdiction over all types of cases and millions of people, civil, criminal, family, juvenile, probate, every type of case. And so it's again, a dream come true. So.
Thank you both for sharing. And one thing I'm hearing it's not discouraging, because you guys are giving us all of the background to it, but it seems like in this field, period, have thick skin, be open to constructive criticism. Just know that you're going to get torn down a little bit to get built up a little bit. So thank you for sharing all of that. We're going to shift gears a little bit. We've talked about impact, and we want to talk now, and Jake's going to take over talking about influence. and our influence and how we share that influence with our community.
So each of you have talked about the influence that mentors and sponsors had on your respective careers and help grow your careers and help just learn from point A to point B to get you where you are now. Many in the Hispanic community are first gen, whether that's first gen graduates of high school, college, or graduate school. How can we as lawyers expand our influence to reach young people on their educational journey? And anybody can answer it.
Yeah, sure. I'll jump in. I mean, I think that there's important points along the way for everybody, and so, for example, it's important to reach people, in high school if possible. Reach people in college. It kind of is like to me, then there is such a great need that you have to pick a thing, that you are a way that you feel the most comfortable to make a difference, and then just go with that, And so whether that is being a mentor to college student or a mentor to law students or mentoring, young associates, supporting, not just mentoring, but also supporting, looking for opportunities as best you can. I think that it's a very open question. It's a great question. And it kind of calls on everybody to think to themselves, okay, what is the way that I can have the best impact? So for example, I know you mentioned Somos Latino Lawyers. We literally were just founded last fall. And so we're a brand new organization, but that is one thing that, we're trying to work on. And I can't really speak to roll out of, here's our 10-point plan of all of the things that we're going to do. But it was born out of a group of Latino women getting together and thinking, how can we make the best impact that we can? And I think that's a personal question for everybody, because it depends on just kind of what your comfort zone is.
And I love that as an example, and thank you for sharing about Somos Latina Lawyers. And Mac, you started something in Austin called Cafecitos. And I would love for you to tell us a little bit more about that. But just generally, I like the example that for each of you in your own ways, you saw a problem and you thought, how can I personally address this problem? And obviously, as a group, as HNBA, we give to so many organizations and we give of our time in a lot of different ways. But I love taking it back to that personal onus as well of I personally can influence someone, anyone. And that does have ripple effects. So please tell us a little bit more about Cafecitos.
Sure. So I did not have the idea for Cafecitos. Cafecitos the concept was started by a group of women in the Hispanic National Bar Association years ago. It's one of these great concepts that nobody claims as their own, but I belonged to a cafecito when I was practicing in New York. And I was, I started my career there after a clerkship. And as I was coming up to the ranks in big law, that was my safe space. I would go to, it was always a breakfast. It was always really informal, intergenerational. It was usually Simpson Thatcher because the person who was organizing it at that time was there. So we just went to this conference room like this, and there were 50 Latinas, anywhere from partners to law students who had a safe space to share. And this is what I loved about it and why I wanted to recreate it for our community in Austin. Our profession is very achievement-based. How often do you go into a space where an attorney stands up and says, I just got a really bad review and I need help? I had never been in a space like that. But Cafecitos was that space. And when I came, and I can't even remember what year I was, but I was very junior. And when I came and I sat there drinking my coffee and I heard that woman being like, I got a bad review, I need help, or I really had a terrible interaction with my partner, I need help. And there was a female partner there in that safe space to be like, I got you, let's connect. I was like, oh, this space is so needed. This is where I am going to come and fill my cup. And I just thought that it was it was a place where people were lifting each other in a way that was non-judgmental. And there was no other organization of attorneys that I had experienced that provided that. And so I had now been, I got to Austin in 2012 because my husband, it was because of my husband's job when we moved there. And I worked first, as I said, at the Attorney General's office, which I actually really loved that job. I returned to private practice and I kept asking, like, is there something like this or something like this? And eventually the answer was no. I was fortunate enough to do the executive leadership program through the organized by the Latina Commission, which I strongly encourage all of the Latinas here to do. Those programs are just excellent. And it was with my cohort, and it was during the pandemic, so it was all Zoom, that somebody said, well, Mac, if you want to start, if you really miss Cafecito so much, just start it. People will show up. And so early 2022, I just invited a bunch of people, and Vanessa and Valerie, among others, showed up. And it's become a community. And what I like about it, and it's interesting because I have a hard time sometimes turning allies down. People will email me personally and say, well, I am married to Hispanic man, my kids are, mixed, or my kids, identify as Latino, or I'm a real ally, and I get it, but and we do open some opportunities for allies, but that space for the less than 2% of us that practice in Central Austin to have that safe space and to have vulnerable conversations and to lift each other is really special. And so I'm super energized by it. And to your point about giving back, and I'm always plugging them in. There's a group at the University of Texas that's called Minority Women Pursuing Law. They invited me to speak once. Now we sort of connected with them. And so the Cafecitos, we have a speed networking event with those college law students. And it really allows those college law students to create genuine opportunities for mentorship, to connect with attorneys in the practice areas that they're interested in. A lot of the students are first generation. I will say one of the most meaningful events for me is we had them come to our law firm and tour, and there was this young woman from Laredo who asked me to take a picture of her all dressed up in front of our logo, the door sign, because she wanted to show it to her grandmother that she actually had finally come to a law firm, and she told me, I have a lot of examples of what not to be, but I don't have a lot of examples of what to be. And so this is a big deal for me. And that day I thought, to your point, I can make a difference. And so we are gonna, it is easy because UT is in Austin. We're gonna make a difference through this group. We're gonna create opportunities for these women to connect, mentorship, to get a bunch of them have gotten jobs as runners or as clerks in law firms, and try to lift them up. So our focus as a group has really been in the college sphere. But there's tons of opportunities. I'm in the Latina Commission. They have the Pearls of Wisdom program, which again, I highly encourage all of you to participate in. You can. That one is focused on high school students. And it makes a difference when you go to a school and you tell your story and the kids see you, they realize, okay, I can do this too. It really does matter for the younger generation to see that they have the option and the possibility to, dream bigger. And I'm sure that like when you guys speak to younger students as judges and the commissioner, that's really for them eye-opening and encouraging about the possibilities.
The opportunity to dream bigger is so important. But how do you connect to grow the networks and then plug in students that are seeking to become lawyers and to join the legal profession, but they don't necessarily know how to get plugged in to find these opportunities in the first place?
I personally do.
Yes. And then
I would say two things I've seen by example. Reaching out from the law student perspective. As a law student, there's nothing stopping you from just like looking, at law firm websites and reaching out to whoever you see on there that is something that you're interested in. And, I get those emails. I love them. And people, I think it says a lot about the kind of person that has the courage to just kind of reach out to somebody and say, hey, I'm interested in what you're doing. Can we get together? Can we talk? And sometimes those can be the basis of further, advice and getting to know people. Even if it's not with the expectation of like getting a job at that same place or that you're going to work for that exact person. It's just about getting to know somebody because yeah, you might be the first person and, don't be shy to reach out. And then I'll do my part, and get back and, we can kind of go from there. What I tend to be most passionate about personally is mentoring people who once they're in the door practicing law and sort of how to stick at it because it's not easy and, keep going and how to grow as a young lawyer. But like I said, it's personal kind of to everybody, how you can best make your impact.
And I want to jump in and kind of flip the question around a little bit because I think we've talked a lot about mentorship today. And I've heard so many great things about how you guys mentor that are in your careers. What do you like to see from mentees? How can we be good mentees for us junior lawyers out here that are reaching out, doing the cold email? What is it that makes a great mentee and a great mentor-mentee relationship?
I think realizing that it's kind of more on the mentee side to reach out to the mentor because I would say, obviously we all want to give all the time in the world, but for the most part, I would say it should be more mentee driven and they shouldn't be afraid to reach out because, I also love hearing from, former interns or, mentees, formal mentees or informal mentees. I try my best to make myself available to anyone, whether, they're looking to get into the law or any, area, because I know that I had my mom who, as I mentioned, was an appellate judge. And so I had this incredibly privileged, upbringing in that, not monetarily, but, in other ways, to have this amazing mentor in my own home. So it's a totally different thing. And I really, really take it seriously because I feel it's incumbent upon me to give back because I know most people don't have that. And so, yeah, I take the opportunity wherever it comes with the, Hispanic bar here in Houston. I'm part of the formal mentorship, committee, and we, pair up mentees. And last year I was actually quite sad because I was assigned one mentee who I reached out to who never responded to me. And I thought, gosh, well, I must have rubbed that person the wrong way, I guess. And so then the next time I said, I'll take 3, thinking, well, if even just one of those 3 reaches back out to me, at least I've done better than last year. And all 3 have responded, and we've been in open communications and in fact, talk to them, somewhat regularly now. So it's been a totally different experience. But that's why I say I'm here, just reach out to me. And I know I'm imagining that all of us feel that way. And whether you're a brand new lawyer or you're a law student, there's always someone who is there to look up to you, who can learn. We all have our own stories. We all have gone through struggles, and there is no one here who couldn't impart some knowledge and experience to someone else. So I do it formally and informally.
I'm happy to chime in. I know there's a ton of questions, so do you want to switch?
No.
Or- okay.
We'll make our way through.
So yes, I'm going to answer this last 2 questions together briefly. In terms of how to best mentor, I say be creative in whatever space you are in, right? So if you're at a firm, how can you not only just take the summer associates out to eat, but then how can you help champion them when they're actually there, making sure they're getting good work assignments? And so it's so much more than just the fun part. It's I'm here for you always. I will advocate for you in small rooms and big rooms, like go to the mat for people. I am an adjunct at U of H Law Center. If you love working with students, I highly suggest you become an adjunct. It's one of my favorite things I do. When I used to be a judge, seeing just the lack of representation of Latinas and Latinos on the bench, we started a nonprofit called Texas Latinx Judges, which anyone can join. Law students, allies, lawyers, other judges, whether or not you want to be a judge, if you want a group of kick-ass judge, mentor, friends to learn from in a safe space, gente de confianza, join Texas Latinx Judges. So it was wonderful getting to start that organization. If you also want another broader national group of kick-ass female judges, National Association of Women Judges. I used to be the co-chair until this year when I became commissioner, but we have this thing called Color of Justice. And so we work with the 3 local law schools, focusing on female law students and law students of color. So that was another great way. So just there's so many opportunities in our HISPA. We have a wonderful mentorship program. Find whatever it is that big brothers, big sisters, but to me, working with the youth and showing them that they can do this and way more is the way you pay it forward. And then in terms of being a good mentee, number 1, respond, which seems obvious, but shockingly, sometimes they don't. Or when you're at a place where you're like, please reach out to me anytime, and then no one reaches out, take people up on their offer. And then send thank you notes. Or for example, if you're brainstorming a situation with them and they give you some kind of advice, fast forward a week, 6 weeks, whenever that situation may resolve itself, whether positively or negatively, send a note. Justice Guerra, thank you so much for your advice, helping me think through X. Here's what happened. I really appreciate it. So kind of making them a part of your journey and not just reaching out when you want something, but making them, like, really bringing them in. I think that keeping that line of communication going makes all the difference in the world.
Thank you so much. And just want to give everyone the opportunity. Were there any other thoughts on this question? Because we're going to shift one more time for our last kind of theme of this conversation. Got everyone's thoughts. Okay, wonderful. And we're going to kind of compress our last section because I do want to be mindful of time and the time that you guys have given to us. So our last theme is from imposter to incomparable. I think all of us at some point in our careers have struggled with some form of imposter syndrome or feeling like I don't belong here, maybe still struggle with that. And so again, I want to kind of flip this question on its head because a lot of times I think we talk about how have you dealt with imposter syndrome, how have you gotten over imposter syndrome? And instead, I want to ask you guys, how have you leveraged your uniqueness, the things that make you feel other and maybe are the stemming factors of that imposter syndrome? How have you leveraged those things as assets in your career and kind of said, I'm here and this is who I am, and made space for yourself in this field?
Well, I'll say, I don't think imposter syndrome, while it's stressful for the practice of law, it can lead to a good result. So it's interesting to me as it's come about and it gets talked about more and more, because I do kind of remember when it wasn't something I'd ever heard of when I was a young associate, and it was just like, oh, well, I have to work super hard to understand, and be even with everybody. And I think that there is some degree of, to what Justice Guerra said early on, I never wanted anyone to say, oh, she's really not that good, or she's not good enough, or oh, I see why she's here. I wanted it to be on my merit, and so my perception of that was was definitely an overcompensation. And I think that is what has made me unique. I've since learned kind of not to be anxious about it, but I think that at the end of the day, this is especially a law firm practice, it's a client service industry, and so I feel like I've leveraged it with just providing the best service I can. And I learned that from kind of looking around my peers at, if you stand out on providing great service, then everything else follows. And I've never really connected that to my own personal background, other than maybe it started from my own, imposter syndrome.
I've had the good fortune. So a lot of this, I didn't have the language until I had the good fortune of learning about it, both through the Latina Commission's sponsored executive leadership program, where a lot of the coaches talk about that script, that internal script that we have as Latinas, and how that comes to play, And also there's some really wonderful work out there. I've also had the good fortune of doing some workshops with El Puente Institute out of El Paso, where they do a lot of the same work. And so what does that mean? It's data-driven, they're data-driven workshops that kind of put in perspective that internal script that a lot of us have, that cultural script, right? So as a Latinas, you have been influenced by a culture of Marianismo, right? Like women always in service and sacrificing in service of others. You have learned and internalized probably a culture of machismo, which is very much part of our culture. The importance of community, familia, right? And Jill had talked about that earlier about in our culturally, the not pushing back when there's a hierarchical relationship. And so those are things that are like embedded in many ways in all of us. And it was for me, I realized, oh yeah, I do a lot of these things, but I can lean into them and leverage them in a way that works for me. And I'll give a very specific example. I realized that the script has things that are, positives and are negatives. And as I choose to lean into the positives, when I was a junior associate and I was taking a deposition, I just mimicked the partners that I went to depositions with. And when they took a deposition, they were sort of, raised their voice and asked questions, and they were very serious. And that's how they got information, because they were playing with that asymmetry of power and they had all that gravitas, right? And as I said, my mentors were older white gentlemen. And so I went to a deposition and I did that thing too. That didn't work for me because I was like 28 and brown. My first name is Maria and I have an accent. And so as I did this learning, how do I leverage that cultural script for me? Well, I am, that community, that sense of community means that I have a lot of empathy and that I always lean into, I lead with empathy. So I am going to lean into that empathy. And it changed how I take the positions, because I take the positions like, you want to tell me, right? My demeanor is I invite you to share with me. Now, that doesn't work with every deposition, but it works 9 out of 10 times, right? When people tell you something and then you're like, anything else? And the information is forthcoming. And so I found my authentic voice by sort of realizing I don't have, this is the script, and there's a way for me to turn this around into a positive rather than just try to suppress all the stuff and mimic a persona that I'm just not. And there's a lot of really young attorneys here. That takes time. It took a lot of mistakes for me to be able to lean into that authentic voice. Even the way I dress, I would have never, ever, ever worn anything but black when I was a very young associate. But as I leaned into my Latinidad, I wear red all the time. I wear white. I wear whatever I want, quite frankly. But I didn't when I was young, because I was like, well, I just don't want anybody to notice. It's bad enough that, I'm here and I'm so grateful to be here. And so I realized there's a lot of that script that works to my advantage, and I can use it professionally as well as personally.
Thank you.
So what I've learned is all of the challenges and hardships are actually assets. And that's easier said than done when you're living them, right? But to me, the ganas, right? The tenacity, the sacrifice that our families have experienced, that we've had to experience, that gives us the edge, right? The fire, the resilience that others who have had it easy may not have. And so to me, flip that imposter syndrome, right? Or insecurity, or whatever word you like to use, and see it as your competitive advantage. So for example, I went to Harvard for college. I had to work 3 to 4 part-time jobs because my parents couldn't help, and I'm still paying off my student loans, even at the age of 42. But I had to work all those jobs. So I had to be, and I was still involved in all these extracurricular activities, and I still wanted to make all A's. And after going to a really bad high school in Laredo, right? And you're with these kids from Exeter and Andover and who are not working any jobs, right? But rather than, oh my goodness, this is so hard, flip it, because you have to get it all done and you become masterful at time management, right? And that resilience. Fast forward, law school. I didn't have a suit to my name. I was, again, working 3 to 4 part-time jobs. You have to get suits. And for some people, that's just like, oh my God, you don't have a suit. But use that opportunity as a way that will always have, you will carry that empathy with you. So I went to Salvation Army down the street. I went to Yale for a law school, and they would go down New Haven and I'd be there. And some of those folks were the same folks we were helping in my criminal defense clinic, right? But getting to be in those shoes and having those lived experiences, fast forward now again in a career I never thought I would be in, all of those things, growing up check to check, right? Not having anything to wear that was appropriate. That makes you stronger. That gives you a perspective that others may not have. So use that as your competitive advantage. And then lastly and relatedly, you know yourself. You know what lights your fire. I knew, as much as I loved learning at Vincent & Elkins, I never wanted to work in a big law firm. Why? Because I wanted to work in social justice and public interest. I knew that. And I felt like I had sold out. And all due respect to big firms are amazing. If you want to do that, lean in and be the best damn attorney ever in that firm. But you know yourself. And if there's something not feeling right, or you're unhappy, like lawyers shouldn't have the greatest percentage of depression and suicide and divorce and all these terrible factors. Why? It's because somewhere along the line, whether it's the golden handcuffs or you're trying to fit in or whatever it is, just check that at the door. We only have one life, and my grandpa died at 45. Maybe you'll live to 101. We don't know. But I just think, especially when there's so few Latino attorneys in this community, in this nation, we are the privileged ones, and we have a perspective that others don't. So make sure that you're using your law degree for the power of good, and whatever that means to you, because we only have one shot. And I thought I was loving what I was doing. And now that I actually every day wake up fired up, it's liberating to my core. And I hope that my 3 little girls at home, who now have a life way easier than, what I had, and I had it way easier than so many others, right? It's all relative. But I hope they carry that, right? That you have to be you. You have to be authentically you and mean it. So for whatever that's worth, carry that with you.
I think it's probably worth a lot. Are you guys ready to bust out of here and go change the world? 'Cause
Harris County
I just feel so
County is
energized.
hiring.
Well, thank you for those words of wisdom. And I just want to plug quickly, if you are a law student and you don't have a suit, there is a fantastic program in Houston. And if you're a lawyer and you have money and a job in here, please donate to this cause called Suit Up, from Mia Lorick, who's a partner at Locke Lord. She started it here in Houston, and it's a wonderful program. We just have one closing question, and I know we're over on time, so we will hopefully be quick, but I'll let you share.
It actually relates to Commissioner Briones' final comments, so
Yeah.
it works very
Perfect.
well. When thinking about your personal power, what is something that drives each of you to press on towards the goal when things get hard as lawyers?
So honestly, it's meeting people and being around other people. And maybe this is a product of COVID isolation, but I'm energized by people. And unfortunately, the job that I have now can feel often very isolating because we do, and Lucero can tell you, sort of 95% of our work is on paper. So we don't see people very often. So I love my job. I've always loved research and writing. And so that is wonderful. I love the impact, that we can have at this court. But I do miss people. And so that's what energizes me. And so, whatever it is, meeting up, learning about other people's stories, that was probably the best part of campaigning, as grueling as it is, getting out to all these corners of these 10 counties and hearing what matters to individuals, what their stories are, that I think just enlightened me, hopefully made me a better candidate, a better, a better judge. Knowing this community, that's what energizes me.
I'll say people in a different way, because, in litigation, it is my favorite thing is, when you are most in the trenches, or when you're doing witness prep and you get to know your clients, you get to be, you get to know very well your fellow partners, your fellow associates at the firm. You get to know everybody around you, because litigation is a story. I mean, that's how I know that I'm in the right area for myself, is if you have to think, okay, if I'm thinking about this on my run every morning, I know I'm doing the right thing.
So I feel the most optimistic when I partake in events like this. When I have the meetings with, I get an email from Mallory about her new job. Those are the things that made me feel optimistic about the state of the legal profession. Latinos are going to be of the population. And we're still, a long way there, but we're less than 2% of the legal profession. And so for us to be truly representative, there's a lot of work. And when you think about the historical inequities in the profession, and when you think about the obstacles, it can also be really lonely. Often the only woman and the only color in a room, and that happens often, I'm sure, to all of us. But then you come into a space like this and you connect with other Latinos who are hardworking and smart. That makes me feel.
Thank you for sharing, and thank each of you for being here today and for sharing your wisdom and your stories with us, and especially your advice. I feel like I took so many pearls of wisdom, and I will carry it with me from here. Lots of notes on my paper. Thank you guys all for coming out today, and I'm going to let Juan close us out. But can we just give a round of applause to our wonderful panel?
Thanks for listening. Emphasis Added is a podcast brought to you by the Houston Law Review. If you like what you see, check us out on Spotify, YouTube, or your favorite podcast streaming app for new content when it drops.
Follow us on Instagram at Emphasis Added Pod, or check out the Law Review at HoustonLawReview.org.